Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Cavaye. I'm riding for Fanatik and we are one this year, racing some World Cups and all over the US and Canada. Hoping to put my mark on the scene in the US this year a bit more. Am I supposed to say anything? Just building some BAMs. So I'm originally from Toowoomba, Australia. I've been in Bellingham for just over 3 years now. So far my season started off well. I did the first 2 World Cups, the first one in Medina, the second one in Derby, Tasmania. Both went well-ish, I learned a lot. Wasn't quite there results-wise, I think I was just rusty a little bit. It was my very first race from the season. And then once I got back home, I started doing some more local races and then ventured up to Canada for some national rounds. My work sponsors this trail, so we come out every now and then and do some trail work or build some random stuff. So we tend to build just big berms just cause, and this is our latest one. Yeah, so I got this guy just recently, two and a bit weeks into recovery. I did this up at that Canadian National at Veta, just on the last stage. It's gone well, good day, and then just got caught out by a very slick, hard-packed grease patch and just went over the bars onto my arm. So I managed to break both the bones of my arm. Not like super bad or anything, so just a little bump in the road. I'll be back still this summer, it's all good. I definitely have to like refocus some of my goals, some of the things I was aiming for. Mostly just bummed to miss out on some of the races that I was really looking forward to, just purely from a fun aspect. So that's a bit of a bummer, but like when you're racing like this, it just kind of happens. There's not really much you can do to prevent it. So just kind of refocusing for some stuff later in the season and trying to keep up as much of my fitness as I can. Yeah, so racing World Cups is usually completely different to any other race that you've done. It's much stricter in rules and there's a lot more people out there and everyone is just a shredder. So just the level from the get-go, even when just in practice and everything, is like super high, like everyone is fast. So the biggest challenge is like getting up to speed with everyone with just one run on the track. You don't really know where you're going and you're trying to learn so much at once in one day. So that's the biggest challenge I'm finding, is just kind of being comfortable and learning the tracks in one day and then being able to go fast the next day, but also being able to go fast without exploding on a track that you don't really know. That's really the key, is going fast but not exploding and being confident in where you're going. Yeah, so this is my first season on the Arrival. I got this bike in January, so this was like in the dead of winter here in Bellingham, so probably not the most ideal weather to be setting up a brand new bike, just because it's very hard to get a feel for the suspension and everything when everything's super cold. But since then, I've obviously done a fair few races on it now, and yeah, just loving it. I'm loving the change in the reach, and it's a bit more nimble, a bit more agile, a bit easier to throw around, and a bit more efficient overall. I'm liking just being able to put it where I want it. Yeah, I'm coming from Forbidden Dreadnought, which is just overall a bit longer, spread out, longer reach. I was a bit more stretched out on that bike, so I think I'm enjoying having a bit more of a compact setup on this bike. It helps a lot, especially with like the World Cup Enduros, where they tend to put you down some pretty janky, weird stuff. So this thing has already like saved me a bunch in like energy and efficiency, being able to just kind of get around the tighter stuff a bit easier. Hasn't really felt like there's been any drawbacks from not being on the high pivot, like it still charges in the rough stuff. Yeah, so one thing that stood out particularly with this bike is the suspension letting me hook the rear wheel around corners a little easier. Previously, I would kind of get in corners and I would be like chasing the front wheel and it would want to jackknife. Whereas this, you can kind of just stand in the suspension and the rear wheel kind of hooks you around real easy. Whereas before you kind of had to really like open up the corners and fight to get it around, particularly in the tighter stuff. Whereas this, you just kind of stand and it brings you around. So that's been a really big help at the races. So I'll just take you through my Arrival 170. I'll start at the top here. We've got the D package, which is the WeAre1 integrated bar and stem. I believe it's the lightest downhill rated bar and stem you can get. That's at 760 width, and I've got 35 mil rise on there and 35 length on the stem as well. I've got my favorite Hayes brakes on here, the Dominion A4s. Super happy with these brakes. I've been running them for a few years now, and they're just reliable. I love them, and they're known for their super light lever feel. One thing to note here, if anyone jumps on my bike, I run my brakes swapped to the North American standard. So my right brake is my front brake, and my left is my rear brake. So if you ever pop a wheel in my bike, you might die. That's my brakes. For suspension, we got the Fox 38 on the front. It's factory. It's 170 mil right now. I've got a Float X2 factory on the back as well. In terms of setup, it's kind of, I switch between a wet and dry setup now in Bellingham, just because wet is so different to dry here. With wet, I usually run a slower rebound and virtually no compression, just to stop my suspension pinging off anything. I just want it to be stuck to the ground as much as possible. In the dry, I'll speed up my rebound quite a bit and run a lot of particularly low speed compression. Not really much any high speed compression anywhere, but I'm usually messing with my low speed rebound and low speed compression, depending on wet and dry. And I have been playing a little bit, and I'm about 97 PSI in the front and like 185 in the back, both with 2 volume tokens. Typically with racing, you want to be pretty prepared and carry enough spares to get you through the day, because you have to be self-sufficient and all that. So I had a funny instance happen at the Derby World Cup where I flatted on the 4th stage out of 6. I flatted at the very top, and I was riding down on my flat tire in the rear. And my tool strap, which was strapped to my frame here, came unstrapped and got sucked into my front wheel under my fender and just exploded everywhere. Like literally just saw everything fly in front of my eyes, like everything I needed to fix a flat tire. So I lost all that. I got to the bottom and I didn't really find like any hole in my tire or sealant or anything. So I just kind of pumped it up with my 1-up pump that I usually carry. And it was holding, but I noticed like I got pedaling to the next stage, and like 15 minutes later, it was pretty much flat again. So I knew something was up, but the transfer times were like super tight. Like you only had a couple minutes before you dropped in usually. So I didn't have time to like pull a wheel off and investigate, and we can't swap a new wheel on because that's just the World Cup rules, and I'd be penalized and basically taken out of the race if I swapped a wheel. So I was left with just having to pump it super hard right before I dropped in every stage. And so I did that for stage 5. I was literally the next person in the gate, and I threw the pump in my bibs, dropped in, and like 2 corners later, my pump fell out of my bibs and I completely lost it. So I had absolutely nothing that I started the race with anymore. So I got to the bottom of that stage with a flat again, and ran around the pits begging for a pump. Thank you, Yeti Mechanic, for your pump. He was lucky. It was lucky that he gave me his pump. So, and I just hauled to the, I was like an hour climb to the last stage, and I just had to go super fast so I could stop and spend time pumping my tire and then continue hauling. Got to the top with a few minutes and dropped in, finished the stage. I was almost top 30 on that stage, and I kept airing my tires to the end of the race. And I survived, but it goes to show that even if you bring all the spares, you might just be out of luck. I got the Fox transfer, the 200 mil. I managed to make it fit in this frame, which was just right because the 200 mil fits me just perfectly. Race Face era cranks they just brought out. I really like how they have the metal crank guard for your shoe. I found that in previous cranks, over time, you can just rub your crank raw with your shoe eventually. So I really like that. It just doesn't rub off and it's nice and they're super strong. And I usually run the mechanical XO1 SRAM drivetrain. Haven't quite got on the full axis program yet just because I'm not really that much of a fan of the lightness of the shifting on the shifter mainly. I think it shifts fine and everything, but I find that when I'm racing or riding, I can accidentally hit the shifter too many times, just it's too light, and I'm just so used to this. I've been running it for so long that I prefer to have the shifter up here. That's the main reason. It's a little bit cheaper to get replacement parts as well. I'm running the Convergence Triad, which is the 30mm internal diameter rims from WeAre1. It's hard to tell the difference, honestly, if from the old wheels to the new wheels, just because I'm on a whole new bike, so it's hard to tell if the wheels have made any difference because everything is new. But so far I can tell if I'm turning and I like catch an edge sideways and I hit something like laterally. Previously the wheels would kind of stand you up and give you like a kind of harsh feel, whereas these don't really hit harshly when you hit things sideways. So they're a little bit more compliant, a little bit more comfortable in that sense. And I've got the Race Face Volt hubs on the back, and they've been super reliable. They have really big bearings on them, which is, I just want my bearings to last a bit longer when they're in the wet of Bellingham here. Schwalbe tires, I'm usually just dedicated to Magic Mary on the front, and I'll kind of switch up the Big Betty and Magic Mary on the back, depending on the conditions. I prefer Big Betty if it's kind of a little more hard pack, need a lot more braking traction. But if it's wet, I might throw a Magic Mary on the back just because I like how it spreads out and digs in a little bit deeper into the softer dirt. Almost exclusively run the soft compound in the Super Gravity. The Ultra Soft is good for the really wet conditions, but I find that it can be a little bit squirmy if you're going fast on dry stuff. And I usually only run an insert in the back. I have a full cush core in the back, and that's just added security. I really don't like hitting my rims super hard, and it's let me finish a race run many times. So that's like most of the reason why I still run a cush core in the back, is just being able to ride out a flat in a race. I will throw it in the front if I really feel like it's necessary. Like in Finale last year, I threw one in the front, and that was definitely needed because I was hitting my rim through the cush core because it was just that rocky. So there's definitely some circumstances where I'll throw an insert in both. So one of the great things about the Arrival is you kind of get more than one bike in this frame. So currently I'm running it at the 170 through this link, but if you wanted to change it to a 150 or 152, sorry, and a 130, you would just switch out this link and the lower link and put a different shock in, and you have a new bike. So that's a great added bonus for running an Arrival. You can kind of just switch whatever travel you want. Another cool thing about the company, WeAre1 as a whole, is that it's entirely made in Kamloops in Canada, and they have a company culture of repairing rather than replacing. So they have a really good warranty, and they'll also repair your frame, usually for a really good price or maybe even for free. So they definitely have the right mindset about keeping bikes under people. It's kind of done, dude. It's ready to go. Just ride it now. Holds up good.